Hey there, listeners. Welcome to Hines On Air, your weekly dose of inspiration, motivation, and real-life entrepreneurial stories. I'm Matt Hines, your host, and I'm excited to have you join me on this journey. From building a successful law firm to venturing into other industries like real estate and social media, I've experienced both the triumphs and the challenges that come with entrepreneurship. I've learned firsthand the importance of resilience, adaptability, and a relentless pursuit of excellence. On Hines On Air, we're diving deep into the world of business, law, and personal growth. Join me as I chat with incredible guests who have faced adversity, defied expectations, and achieved extraordinary success. We'll discuss their strategies, their mindset, and the lessons they've learned along the way. Whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur, a seasoned business owner, or simply someone looking for a little inspiration, Hines On Air is for you. Remember to subscribe, like, and leave a review whenever you listen to podcasts. Your support helps us reach more people and continue sharing these incredible stories. Let's get started.
Hey everybody, it is Matt Hines. We are back with another exciting Hines On Air. I'm extremely excited about our guest today because she's coming right at the right moment as far as what the political currents and trends are doing right now. She is a political expert on how to keep our country together and not let us get too divided to the point where we're destroying ourselves. She's the author of a book, Remaking the Space Between Us, where she discusses all those topics. She's worked with congressmen, other leaders. What an exciting person to interview. And I am pleased to announce Miss Diana McLean Smith. Deanna, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Matt. I appreciate it. It's great to be here. And I know you have a background on this podcast of talking with entrepreneurs and business leaders. And that's where I began my career.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, so I was really interested in coming on your show because I think there are a lot of parallels between what people are up against in organizations and what we're up against today in our nation and other nations.
You want to lead us off with that? Like, what do you see?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of the reasons I wrote the book, I had written 3 prior to that, which were all written about the world of business, and one of the case studies I did was of Steve Jobs and John Sculley at Apple.
Oh, wow.
Where you had this extraordinarily talented, rather odd, quirky fellow, Steve Jobs, incredibly creative. And the board thought that he needed somebody who was more seasoned, more level-headed. And so they looked around and they recruited John Sculley from Pepsi. And John Sculley saw an earlier version of himself in Steve Jobs. So he took the role of his partner, and over a period of about a year, the relationship devolved, and camps build up around the 2 different perspectives, and the board itself became somewhat divided. But in the end, John Sculley managed to orchestrate the firing of Steve Jobs,
right?
And that cost Apple billions of dollars. And so one of the things I was trying to drive home there and am driving home here is that this choice to be in conflict across groups and across belief systems or parties is going to cost us and is costing us billions of dollars, and it's coming out of our pockets. So we better get a grip.
All right. So you just brought up a lot of points. First off, let me ask this. I agree with you. I've heard from people who I trust that Jobs, yes, because you could say Jobs 1.0 and Jobs 2.0 when he came back are so different in their approach, in the way they handle business and all. And when Sculley was there, he was like, look, Jobs was brilliant. He got things done. He had that, what did you call it? Reality distortion bubble thing, they called it. But he was not a good manager. I think the Macintosh was a failure and all. Or maybe it was the Apple II, one of his big product launches.
The most recent one that was not doing as well as they had expected.
Right. So do you think, you said when they got rid of Jobs, they lost billions. You think if he'd have stayed, they would have climbed faster or done a lot better?
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good point. I do think he learned from that experience. I don't think he was Jobs 2.0.
No.
I really don't. No. I think Tim Cook was an extraordinarily brilliant partner to Steve Jobs.
Oh, I've never heard that. I don't doubt that. He's doing a great job. He's been doing a great job.
Yeah, no, I think Sculley first of all, I think Sculley was a remarkably talented guy. I'm not going to dump on him at all.
Yeah.
But he got very frustrated and annoyed and did not know how to, quote unquote, get Steve to be a different person, which was his goal and his mission. Just like the Democrats are trying to get the Republicans are trying to get the Democrats, to change, but they're not looking at themselves. They're not seeing that they're implicated in the dynamic. And I don't think Sculley understood that the approach he was taking to try to be helpful to Steve was absolutely the worst thing you could do. It was driving Steve completely crazy. The other thing I'll say is Sculley went behind his back a lot to try to get things done.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's not how Tim Cook operated. Tim Cook had a lot of respect for Steve Jobs. He could stand up to Steve Jobs. They could argue back and forth. They could get creative about their differences in view. They understood that they had different talents and different strengths. And so they had a partnership which allowed them to weather the differences in personality. One of the things that's always fascinated me is that people do have personalities. Steve Jobs and John Sculley, and they all have personalities. But you can either exacerbate or modify the responses of people depending on how you deal with them. Okay? And Sculley was exacerbating the very qualities in Steve Jobs that he didn't want Steve to manifest in how he dealt with him. Okay? And I think that Tim Cook understood how to deal with Steve in a way that was respectful, thoughtful, understood how to harness. This isn't to say that Steve didn't learn. I don't want to make it that extreme because I think he did learn. But I think he needed a different partner.
That makes sense.
And by the way, that different partner could have been John Sculley 2.0.
Yeah.
It didn't necessarily mean Sculley had to go, but I think Sculley had to rethink his approach to Steve Jobs, and he never did.
From what I remember, they kept trying to get Jobs to understand or go in one direction. He was not going to go in that direction. So they kind of gave him his little unit. I don't know if they were working on the Apple II or another Macintosh.
I forget the versions because I've been around the Apple world for so long. It's many iterations. But no, that's what a lot of organizations do. They try to take the person who's the so-called problem and they try to put them away in a circumscribed part of the organization when, it's like they're Tyrannosaurus Rex. I mean, they're not going to stay there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just not going to happen. It's unrealistic. It's the same thing you see in all systems. People have a personal, interpersonal, intergroup cultural problem that they try to solve through formal structural means.
Yeah.
Okay. And you can't. It just doesn't work.
More conversation, more understanding between the two, or what do you suggest?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be, John Sculley assumed he was right and Steve was wrong.
Right.
Right there, that's a problem. And that's what we have in our country right now. I'm right, you're wrong. Okay. So you go in with that mindset that automatically puts you in the position of trying to first persuade the other person to think like you. And if they won't, then coerce them into thinking like you. And people who are trying to, when it's a one-way persuasion or a one-way coercion process, they will fight back even harder.
Yes.
And that's what Steve Jobs did.
Yeah. I think human beings have a natural tendency to want to be right.
Well, it's not a natural tendency. It's a learned tendency.
Okay. Well, it's there.
Well, it is. No, it's absolutely there. But it matters whether we talk about it as natural and innate or whether we see it as socialized and learned, because the second is alterable and the first is not.
Yeah. Okay. If I think the sky is green and you're like, no, Matt, and you fight me tooth and nail,
right,
I'm going to be stronger in my position that it's damn green. Yeah. And say, all right, let me go look with you and let's see. Oh, maybe it's blue. I don't know.
Let me look with you, or let me say, gee, you say it's green. Okay. What are you seeing? When do you see it as green? Let's go together and see what you're seeing. And why do you think that? And I think of it as blue. And here's why I think of it as blue. I wonder how it could be that you could think of it as green but what you're getting at, and it's a little bit different, obviously in the social domain where you can't just go out and look at the sky. But it's to try to agree on what data you would agree on as data. It's like, do we agree that this is the data? No, we don't agree. Okay, so let's get a pool of data we actually agree on. Okay, and let's look at it together, and then let's think about it together. This is what Derek Black and Allison Gornick, two friends who met in college. One was left wing, and the other was the heir apparent to the white nationalist movement. Diametrically opposed in their views.
Right.
And they decided that they wanted to try to understand better how they could see things so differently. And over many months, they got together. They thought about what data would they find convincing, what data did they think met their standards, and they met for a long time debating it and thinking about it, and eventually arrived at a new point of view. And he did disavow white nationalism in the end. But she also disavowed the sort of automatic knee-jerk left-wing reaction of all people who might be on the right are just stupid, ignorant, or evil people. And she gave that view up. I mean, they both learned from this experience.
Well, let me ask you this. I agree with everything that
Yep.
you said. In the political realm, though, it seems to be a little more complicated. For example, Congress just put up this 1,500-page spending bill after Daj and Vivek and Elon, and all of them are pushing this massive effort to cut excess spending. And yet the people who seem to agree with that idea now throw up a bunch of pork barrel spending propositions that seem to be in contravention or against everything that they appeared to support. And the question is this: when you're a politician, you seem to have good ideas and know what is best for the country. But if there's so many vested interests influencing you, are you able to listen to the other side and agree, or are you still compelled to go with the person that's funding the campaign?
Well, there's so much that you're saying there. I want to say a few things.
Okay.
One is Congress is not a monolithic entity. There are pockets within Congress where people are still trying very hard to work together and come up with solutions that actually satisfy the interests of both parties.
Okay.
So there are pockets, okay? But you're right that there are these logger jams that happen, okay? And when it wasn't me who worked with Congress people, it was my husband.
Okay.
He went, as part of the Rebuild Congress initiative, he went to Congress in 2017, and by 2018, he was working with a little-known but highly effective committee called the Modernization of Congress, led by Derek Kilmer from Washington State, and initially Graves from, I think, South Carolina. I could be wrong. And then in the second iteration, which was in the second term, it was a temporary committee. It ran through 2 sessions, was with Timmons, both Republicans. The leadership, Graves and Kilmer, Graves and Timmons, agreed that they had to operate the committee differently if they wanted to get anything done. So they decided to blow up the usual operating way of Congress. And instead of having Democrats on one side and Republicans on the other, they had them sit Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican. They broke bread together. They had dinner together. They had a retreat initially, and they got an enormous amount done. So I just want to say there, we have this sort of monolithic view. Okay. The third thing I want to say is we're in a position right now where we tend to think that the country is, and Merriam-Webster came out and said polarization is the word of the year. And what polarization, if you define it, it means that views and interests and opinions no longer exist along a continuum, but they're at opposite ends of an extreme. Okay. And I think that's the view we all have of the country and we have of Congress and so on. But if you look at the actual research data, organizations like More in Common, which have done incredibly rigorous research, it ends up that 67% of us actually exist in tribes. They call them political tribes because they're different. They vary from more Republican leaning to more Democratic leaning, but 67% are in a range of tribes along a continuum, not on the opposite ends, where they are more flexible and more pragmatic than the extreme ends. So then you have to ask the question, so why do we all believe it's so extreme? That's because of two things. One, the press leads with what bleeds. Okay? And so they are naturally drawn, as Roger Ailes once explained to Judy Woodruff. He goes, you have two candidates on a stage. One guy rolls out the 3-point peace plan for the Middle East. The other one falls in the orchestra pit. Who do you think the press is going to cover? And he calls it his orchestra pit theory of politics. So you have a press which is naturally drawn to covering the extreme ends of the spectrum, both in Congress and among citizenry. All right. So that then creates an imbalance. But the big question in my mind, and now I'm going to come all the way around to something that I think is the most important about Congress, is the people themselves need to stop ceding power to the extremists and stop waiting for Congress to solve problems that they can and currently are solving at the local level, working across divides. Okay? So you get groups like the Tennessee 11. You have a Second Amendment absolutely devoted to the gun rights, working with people who've seen gun violence and are committed to gun control. 11 of them working together, talking about their common experiences, working through different ideas for reasonable gun control. Okay. There are examples like this across the country. So I'm not as concerned about Congress, which I think is captive to the citizenry.
Really?
That is, they have to appeal to their base.
Okay. When you say
Their base.
I think of the population as a whole, and I don't see them really. I see them getting there and then doing their own thing.
No, well, yeah. The saddest thing my husband told me was an interview he had with a congressman. He said, I ran for Congress because I wanted to make a difference, and once I got here, I felt like a potted plant. I mean, he was captive to so many things. The citizenry, only one of them. But people do have to, like in primaries, they have to appeal to the activists. And we citizens have ceded our power to the activist extremist base. And there are millions of Americans that the media is not covering. And I talk about in the book, Remaking the Space Between Us. I talk about these groups, and there are a lot of them. And this is like empirically researched. Millions of Americans who are countering the extremist and working very hard to work across divides to come up with new solutions to old problems. And I think that's where the future lies. I don't think it's electing this person or that person because they can't win right now. We, the people, have become the problem.
Okay. Do you think, you mentioned the press earlier, do you think the press creates or certainly exacerbates it to some degree, the way they focus on the extremists?
No question. I think it's a circular dynamic. But, the press wouldn't succeed if they weren't right in thinking that we love to eat it up. Okay.
They just got a reality check with this recent election, because a lot of the extremist reporting press, I think, the ratings are dropping, the money's dropping, people are taking salary cuts. It's exciting. Yeah. To me, this was a breath of fresh air. What just happened?
And I'm hoping that it's the extremists are going to burn out, and that the people who are in that 67%, who, by the way, they call the exhausted majority, and that's the biggest thing we have working against us, is that group is so exhausted that they're not exercising the kind of power they could to reclaim a voice and a place at the table. Now, there are millions doing it, but we need even more. We need many millions doing it in order to resist all these forces driving towards the extreme.
So you're saying, okay, I don't know. You mentioned the Tennessee 11. What are they doing?
That was the gun group.
That's the gun.
That was the gun group. The Tennessee 11 got together over, this is the other thing. It's like people want to have these 2-hour dialogues across differences. That's not going to do it. The people who are making a difference are people who are working at the state or local level on problems that are affecting us all, whether it's gun violence, whether it's immigration, whether it's the effects of climate change through floods and fires, keep going down the list. Okay. These groups are getting together and they're working together over time on common problems. And while they're working together, they actually get to know each other.
Right.
So the stereotype we all have in our heads of this, nutcase on the other side of the spectrum, they just go away and they begin to see them as complex people. And, it's the same in an organization. How many organizations succeed if manufacturing and marketing are at each other's throats and never talk to each other?
I'm in complete agreement with you. Let me ask your opinion. Do you think it's wise and prudent for Trump to have dialogue with Putin and North Korea and Xi Jinping, all these leaders who we categorize as the evil enemy? Do you think it's good that he speaks with them and tries to reach common ground, or would you say?
I think dialogue is always the right thing to do. I think it's dangerous if you don't have a strategy and a goal and a set of ideas for what a possible solution space might look like, and you make sure you don't sell the store.
Yeah, I agree that the dialogue is definitely this. I don't like it when Tulsi Gabbard or somebody wants to speak with Putin and now she's a Putin sympathizer. I think that's ridiculous. I think, there just has to be some dialogue to start the conversation and wind up with a solution. You can never talk. How the hell do you end the conflict?
You have to have a dialogue. I'm not up to date enough on all the data, and so I don't like to speak outside the realm of what I know, or at least, have confidence in. I don't think it was just that she wanted a dialogue with him. I think it's other things that
might be.
Yeah.
That might be. But I think what they're saying.
But the dialogue itself should not be considered suspect. You might have concerns about the person going into the dialogue because of things you've heard in the past.
Did you agree when Tucker Carlson wanted to interview Putin?
I don't care.
Oh, it's not a big deal. Okay.
I don't care.
I'm not trying to set you up for a debate.
Me, Tucker Carlson is part of the problem in that he is on the more extreme end, stirring things up as opposed to trying to truly understand the other side.
Okay. Let me ask you this.
Am I mistaken in that?
I think Tucker is a necessary voice in the change that we're going through. I, for the large part, appreciate him. When he, I guess you could say, bucked the system at Fox because the January 6th event was so politicized and so, I think, twisted. And he, from what I understand, went against the network and released videos that show people peacefully walking through the White House and saying, look, this is not an insurrection. These people were ushered in to have a tour. Now they're being arrested. And a lot of people got upset that he did that. So I like that, to me, it got so one-sided to the left with the attacks on Trump. I mean, he was indicted, civil cases. There was so much thrown, and it didn't feel like there was any way. I mean, people could complain, but still, the cases were going forward. They were trying to put him in jail for the rest of his life. So I was glad to see some people step up and sort of fight for that side, I guess.
Okay. So we were already thinking in terms of sides.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's just look at, for a moment, the data on both sides, not one or the other.
Okay.
Okay. So let me first see if I'm understanding you. When you say Tucker served as a corrective, if what you're saying is he showed video of people who were peaceful in the Capitol, okay,
yep.
And that was happening in addition to the violence that happened, That's one argument. But I think I heard you say that the violence did not occur, that people were actually invited in and were just touring the Congress, and the violence did not happen. Is that what you're saying?
It's the first thing you said, that in addition to some of the violence and stuff, there were a lot of people who were arrested who weren't violent.
Okay.
It was he gave sort of the whole picture. Yeah.
All right. So let's imagine we're back in the 1960s.
Right.
And an anti-war movement demonstration, of which there were many in Washington, D.C. Let's say it's spilled over, and these left-wing activists against the war broke down the windows of the Capitol building and went inside and intimidated the legislators and stopped them from taking a vote, let's say, on the war. Okay. And they had, they used flagpoles and, bats and all sorts of weapons to hit and injure, police officers and to get in the building. What would you have suggested, law enforcement and Congress do?
Oh, arrest them.
Okay. And you would obviously not want anyone arrested who wasn't being violent, right? But you'd want to arrest the ones who are being violent, correct?
Yes.
What do you think of Trump pardoning all of them?
Yeah, I know. Well, I think he said, I will look at the individual cases. I don't know that he's saying, I'm going to get a blanket pardon to anybody who was arrested on January 6th. Maybe he did. You can correct me. But I said, from what I hear, he will review the individual cases. If somebody was a complete, nut job and they deserve to be in prison.
Okay.
I don't want to encourage people to do stuff like that and say, then you'll get off the hook later on. They should not be raiding the White House.
Well, the trouble you and I have is the trouble the general population has, which is our conversations being mediated by the press. And so what Trump said or didn't say, I'm not confident of, so I don't know where to go. But what I've heard is that he was going to pardon them, and it was a more uniform kind of thing. But you very well could be right. So let's both get our own data on that. But let's go back to, let's say Tucker, did have video being peaceful in the Capitol. How does that make what happened there any less sort of problematic in terms of how we want to run ourselves as a democracy? How does the fact that there were some peaceful people there, because that's true in any demonstration that gets violent, how does that counter the problem of what happened in the Capitol on January 6th?
The way it was reported, to say that there was a violent insurrection and that people were trying to take over the White House, for the media to run with that narrative and then say, okay, hold on now, this guy, I think that guy went to jail for 20 years or is in prison. It hadn't been long enough for 20 years, but he went to jail. And then to say, wait a minute, okay, maybe there are mistakes, but it's not to the extent that's portrayed by the press. Here's a guy who's just being escorted through, and he was arrested. So it diminishes the credibility of the press when they want to play it off as everybody was evil. This was the end of America. Okay, there were definitely mistakes, and things it shouldn't have happened for sure. But everybody there, it wasn't like they portrayed, in my opinion.
It wasn't like what? I'm sorry.
It wasn't like they portrayed.
Yeah, well, I think they is, again, it's just like Congress isn't monolithic. The press isn't monolithic. Yeah, the left-wing and right-wing press both cherry-picking data to make their point.
No doubt.
Okay. Yeah, okay. And I, as a consumer of the media and as a citizen of the United States with a deep sense of stewardship for my country, try very hard not to be held captive by what I hear from any media outlet, which is what led me to write the book and to do my own research independently. And I think as citizens, we have an obligation to do that. Yeah. Okay. Instead, what we do is we take sides, like you and I just did. Did Tucker Carlson serve us or did he not? Yeah. Okay. I mean, more important than that is how do we try to exercise our own if everybody talks about the importance of having an independent press, first of all, that's not even possible. They're all biased. And they're not just biased from a political point of view, they're biased towards selling papers. Okay. So I'm less concerned about an independent press than I am about an independent citizenry.
We have smart enough. That's a horrible way to put it. But do you think they're mature enough to realize that they're being misled? Because I hear so many people parrot off what they hear on the media, and I'm like, wait a minute, that's not fact. Whether it's Fox or whether it's CNN.
It's not, but that's a really good point. It's a really good point. I mean, the number of people I've heard denigrate citizens and say things like, citizens are busy. They don't have time to do this. What are you asking of them? I mean, right. It's like, first of all, I think the way many, not all, but many citizens operate now is I don't think they understand as fully as is in our interest, how much the media they're consuming is standing between them and reality, okay, and distorting that reality. I think if they understood that they're not getting the real deal, they might be more proactive, okay, which is one reason I wrote the book. I mean, it was like, hey guys, we're being played for suckers, okay. We're being played for suckers by the press on the right and the left, and by politicians, mostly on the extremes. So I think we have an obligation as citizens to try to educate ourselves. Do I think it's possible? I absolutely think it's possible. Millions of people are already doing it. How could it be impossible if that were true? Does it need to be more people than exist now? Absolutely. That's why I wrote the book. Okay. Because we do need more of us to do that. On the right and the left, I have a lot of friends on the right. I have a lot of friends on the left. I'm an independent. I think both parties are in deep trouble. And I think that's one of the reasons why our country is in trouble. So I think we need to exercise not as an independent party, but as independent thinkers. We need to be thinking for ourselves and we need to do the research for ourselves. And Lord knows the internet gets slammed all the time and should, but it's an incredible source for trying to find reliable news. So if you're someone on the right, the last thing you should do is go down a right rabbit hole. You should be trying to correct for your bias.
Yeah.
You not by going down a left rabbit hole, but by trying to find more dispassionate media sources, and they're out there. What? Christian Science Monitor is an example.
Christian Science, that's funny. You got my question. What would you recommend to the audience? Where should they look to get good?
Here's where I would look. I would look. Christian Science Monitor is better than most. It's not a religious outlet, even though it was founded by the Christian Science Church. It reports very evenly the facts of the case, and it not only does that, but it does this not all the time, but a good amount of the time, and certainly more than most papers. It not only looks at the problems out there and the causes of those problems, but they're looking at what people are doing to solve them. So I came across a story there while I was writing the book about a town in Ohio, Middletown, Ohio, that was struggling with the culture wars affecting schools. Okay. And you had the left and the right arguing over the curriculum. And they had a new guy who was head of the school board. He had a clue what to do. Okay. And so he went to the faith leaders in the community. He was new. So he said, is this how people in this town usually act? And they went, no. And he goes, so what do we do? So the faith leaders mobilized citizens who were not on the extreme left and the right and invited them to come to the meeting. And the next time extremists tried to take over the mic, the next person to get up was a faith leader and then a citizen. And all of them were saying, look, we do have questions about the decisions being made by the board, but we stand next to you. We want to work with you to solve the problems. This has to be about the kids. It can't be about our ideology. Okay. And they totally turned around the culture wars. Okay. So, that was reported by the Christian Science Monitor in one of their stories called Stopping Culture Wars in Their Tracks. Another place I highly recommend people go to is an organization called Solutions Journalism Network. And Solutions Journalism Network is trying to reinvent the news so that the news isn't reported through an outrage mindset, but is reported through an engagement mindset, where they report on things citizens are doing to engage one another and the problems in their communities. And they are reporting on the solutions that people are coming up with while they're working together in communities. And if you go to the Solutions Journalism Network and you look at the top of the page, it has Story Tracker. And it has all the stories that these journalists have done. Now, this organization has so far trained tens of thousands of journalists to publish stories like this. And you can now start to see them in traditional outlets. Okay. This is by no means overtaking the dominant press, but this is stuff that you and I can do. We can go on, look up Solutions Journalism Network, look up the Christian Science Monitor. I can't attest that Reuters is the best that there is, but Reuters is less, hysterical than many of the other news outlets that I've seen, and more balanced than many of them that I've seen. So that's the kind of thing I think people can, and I would recommend, not to be self-promoting, but let me be self-promoting for a moment. I go to my book.
Yeah. No, you've sold me. Every time you've referenced it, I'm like, it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's just story after story after story. And if, forget the stories, look at the footnotes, because it will show you where to go to find out more. Everything I say in that book, you can independently judge by the footnotes.
Yeah. Okay. It is very refreshing to hear that there's so many well-intentioned groups out there that outnumber the crazies.
Yeah. Yeah.
On TV.
Yeah, but there's a lot of good out there, and we can't afford to give up, and we've got to stop fighting against each other, and we've got to start fighting with each other.
Deanna, let me ask you, I'm getting my time limit, but I'm thoroughly enjoying the conversation with you. All right, so Trump went through all he went through over the last 3 or so years with the criminal cases, the civil cases, the New York judges, I think a lot of which was politicized against him. It was not legitimate cases. And you could disagree. I'm not sure your stance, but
okay.
I thought it was pretty unfair. Now he's in power. So he's in a situation where he can go after people who may or may not have wronged him. Let's assume they did wrong him. Should he do it? Should he just say, I'm going to let it slide. I'm going to let the people who lied, I'm going to let it go. If you broke the law or violated rights, I'm just going to let it go. Or should he just try to clean it up because they're a problem? Or, would that just perpetuate the problem?
No, I mean, I think you're getting at a really important point, and it's one that most people, I think, struggle with mightily. So it's very important. If you look at the people who have created the most fundamental change in societies, they're going to be looking at, what can I do to heal my society, bring it together, and allow it to move on so it can do one thing that it is responsible for doing. And that is solve the problems that are common to everybody, that are harming everybody. That's my number one goal, is to create that reality. Okay. And the person who I love most, who I think understood that, was Nelson Mandela. He said, if you want to make, I wish I could, it's like, make your enemy your partner, and then he becomes your friend. And this is a man who had been in prison for decades, who worked with de Klerk, his polar opposite. He didn't work with de Klerk to try to put him in prison for 19 years because he had put him in prison for 19 years. He said, I got to work with this guy because he's the guy who can help us figure out how to bring South Africa together so it stands a chance of coming together and being a country that's whole. And now South Africa has struggled mightily because it continues to suffer the legacy of its history. Okay. But it does not have apartheid anymore. And that is a step forward of progress. So, I think we're better off as a society if we keep our eye on the prize, which is creating a society that's capable of solving the problems it faces. And we are not that society right now. And I would hope that Trump, as president, would try to move us in that direction.
Got you. That's a good answer. I got you. Yeah, you started that response with where I think you said torn mightily or something, but you're right. Because I half of me wants Kash Patel. He's nominated for the FBI. I want him to go in there and clean house. And then half of me is like, look, that's just gonna create enemies. And then when the Democrats are in control, they're gonna come back at you. And then it's like, I don't know. It's a tough.
Yeah, you get it. You get both sides of it.
Yeah.
People are mad as hell. They're exhausted. They're tired. They're resentful. They want somebody to blame because they feel so damn helpless. Yeah. It's a very tempting solution, but it's not going to get us where we need to go. And this is where I actually, can people do it? Yes. I think I've seen people do it. I've spent my career watching people move from the one stance to the other. Okay. It is a debate we're all going through within ourselves. That's the right place for the debate to be, right? By the way, because that's the one we've got to win. Because I think we need to understand that we all have something at stake here in trying to heal the divides and bring us together. By the way, More in Common, which does research on people, says 67% of the country really wants us to get together and heal divides.
All right.
Okay, 67%. So that's pretty encouraging. Now, they may not know how to do it, and they may feel ambivalent when they're up against somebody who disagrees with them, but that's what they want. So let's give it to them.
That's good to hear. Yeah, no, it's good that we have 67% maturity and wisdom.
Yeah, exactly. You got a fighting chance.
That's right. Listen, Deanna, thank you so much for your time.
Matt, I can't thank you enough. This is a lot of fun.
This was a lot of fun, and thank you for everything you're doing. I know enough people, they get stuck on the sides and they get caught in the war, and they forget the bigger picture, but you're keeping us focused.
Well, thanks for that. Yeah, that's very kind to say. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome, and I encourage everybody. The book is Remaking the Space Between Us. Tremendous author, Diana McLean Smith. Deanna, thank you again.
Matt, thank you again. You have a great day.
All right, yes, ma'am, you too.
Take care.
All right. And everybody, thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. I hope you're going to take this information and change your lives and create a better country for all of us. But thank you for joining us. This has been another Hines On Air. If you haven't, please click the subscribe button, follow us, and leave us a comment. Until we'll see you next time.
Hines On Air is for you. Remember to subscribe, like, and leave a review whenever you listen to podcasts. Your support helps us reach more people and continue sharing these incredible stories.